about all the budget crisis and everything, so.
Oh, yeah.
Fun stuff, let me tell you. I'm pretty safe. I've been with the city almost 20 years. I've been doing labor compliance for many years, and before that I was Secretary 3, and so, you know, I'm pretty safe. If they offered me a retirement package, I'd take it, but I don't think I'm close enough. All set? Okay. All right, well, my name's Debbie Decker. I'm with the City of Phoenix Labor Compliance Office. We are currently part of the Engineering and Architectural Services Department, but we don't know how that's all going to shake up eventually. And Christine asked me here today to talk to you about the Davis-Bacon requirements on federally funded projects. It's very important that you understand right now the reason I'm involved is that the City of Goodyear received money through the City of Phoenix to do the Park and Ride. And that makes the City of Phoenix responsible to make sure the City of Goodyear enforces and monitors the Davis-Bacon and related acts on the project. But I believe probably the City of Goodyear is going to start receiving their own federal money at some point, and you'll need to make sure that you understand what you're doing, because what can happen, and it did happen to the City of Phoenix back in the 80s, the guy who kind of handled Davis-Bacon retired, and they did not replace his, they replaced his project management function, but not his Davis-Bacon function, and there was a big mess at one of the water treatment plants, and EPA came in, and the City of Phoenix lost its federal funding for a period of time. That's a bad thing. When a municipality loses their federal money, it's not good. So the Labor Compliance Office was established to assure that that never happened again. And it never has. And it never will on our watch, because our jobs are important to us. So that's what I'm here to help you guys learn about. I think Christine wants to make sure that everybody's on the same page, from applying for the federal money to putting together the bid documents, to issuing the contract, to working with the contractor during the course of construction. You need to understand that these are very important regulations. So this is our packet, the front of our packet that we give out to contractors, and I've just kind of adapted my this particular presentation. It was a 4-hour workshop that I gave to some subcontractors for the light rail project, and I've adapted it for you guys. So a little bit of history. The Davis-Bacon Act is not a Depression-era regulation. It's not a Depression-era law. We always kind of said it was because it was in 1929. But it actually had nothing to do with the Depression. During the Roaring 20s, construction industry was demoralized, and there was a lot of fierce, very cutthroat competition. And our Representative Robert Bacon was involved in some public works projects in New York, and he introduced this act and got Senator Davis to work with him on it, because what happened, his example was, there was a federally funded project in New York to build a hospital, and the local contracting community was undercut and underbid by contractors from the south, where it was very depressed. They would underbid, and then they'd bring up these laborers that they could pay nothing and house in shacks, and they'd build the public works project. And Senator Bacon, even though he looks like he was, or Representative Bacon, even though he looks like he was kind of one of the good old boys, what he said to the House of Representatives was, the Veterans Hospital was awarded to a firm from Alabama who had brought some 1,000 workers into my district. They were herded onto this job. They were housed in shacks. They were paid a very low wage, and the work proceeded. It seemed to me that the federal government should not engage in work in any state and undermine the labor conditions and wages paid in that state. The least the government should do is comply with the local standards in the locality where the construction is to take place. One of the things he believed that this bill would do would protect local businesses by providing a level playing field for the bidding process. Other parts of your state or country may have different wages, and so this levels it out for the locality. Representative Bacon, he was born in 1923 in Massachusetts. His father was Secretary of State under Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. He graduated from Harvard in 1907 and then Harvard Law School in 1910. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in World War I, and he served in the Officers Reserve Corps during his tenure in Congress until he died in 1938. Senator Davis had a very interesting life also. He was born in Wales and immigrated with his parents. He went to work in a steel mill until 1898, and then he went to Indiana and he was served as a city clerk. And then he was in the local government throughout Pennsylvania. He served as the U.S. Secretary of Labor under 3 consecutive presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover. And his main focus was on immigration, which was under Department of Labor at that time. And he established the U.S. Border Patrol. His major accomplishment was convinced the U.S. Steel to abandon the 12-hour workday and let people work a little less. He did work in steel mills. His nickname was Puddler, and I thought that was interesting, and I kind of wasn't sure I wanted to know why. But Puddler was actually a job in the steel mill. It was in charge of the reverberatory furnace where they would melt the pig iron down and then convert it into wrought iron. And puddling was a highly skilled job that required a lot of stamina and strength, so that was what he did. He actually wrote an autobiography called The Puddler. And so they introduced the Davis-Bacon Act, and it was enacted in 1931. And this is what it calls for. Federal construction projects that are greater than $2,000. Well, in 1931, $2,000 was a lot of money. You can't even do abatement on a small house for under $2,000 now. That's the prime contract. A lot of times your subcontractors will say, my contract's only for $1,500. It's the prime contract. The subcontracts fall under that. It's new construction, alteration, repair, remodeling, painting, and decoration. There's very few exceptions. It pretty much covers any kind of public works, federally funded jobs. It applies to all laborers and mechanics, and it requires that they all be paid no less than the prevailing rate that is established by Department of Labor for the area. What it means is, mechanic actually means skilled tradesmen. For some reason, they used to call them mechanics. Pardon? Journeyman's another term you can use. Basically, it requires payment of the prevailing wage for the work performed. And it requires weekly payment of wages. They can pay daily, like a day labor place might pay daily, but they can't pay less often than weekly. So no biweekly pay, no monthly pay. That's another one of the rules that you need to make sure contractors understand ahead of time, because they'll be like, wait a minute, I pay every 2 weeks. You either have to change that or you can't work on this project. It requires that, this is the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act. Okay, so Senator Royal Copeland, he was an interesting fellow too. He introduced this Anti-Kickback Act in 1934. Why? Well, some contractors found a way around the Davis-Bacon Act. They said, this requires that I pay you $10 an hour, but if you want to keep your job, you're going to give me $5 an hour back. I'll write you the check, but you're going to give me the money back. So they were taking kickbacks. And so it makes taking kickbacks from employees a crime, and it requires weekly submission of the payroll certification, or what we call the statement of compliance, and that's that little form. It's the second half of Department of Labor's payroll form. And one of the things that contractors tend to do is take that statement of compliance and create their own, which is fine, but they always leave out the little clause that's underneath the signature that says, by signing this, I realize that if this isn't true, you can haul me into court on it. So you need to check for that and make sure that they keep that clause in there when they create their own form, because it is a crime to take kickbacks or to falsify payrolls. Not that I've ever seen anyone hauled to jail for it, but nonetheless, it can happen, and people need to be aware of that. Senator Copeland was an ophthalmologist, an academic, a restaurant owner, dean of a medical school, mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and president of the New York Board of Health. He served 3 terms in the U.S. Senate. He was a homeopathic doctor, and he actually incorporated the homeopathic medicines into the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which gave homeopathic medicine permanent legal status. He was also, this is just interesting, he was a member of the Society for the Advancement of Better Living, which seemed to be established to promote eating. They would meet at fine dining establishments and work their way through course after course of gourmet meals. So the other thing that the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act does is monitor deductions. Any deductions other than taxes, there are criteria and rules that apply to those deductions. And they are that it's to the worker's benefit, not the contractor's benefit. It is voluntary, it is authorized in writing by the worker, and it is not a requirement of obtaining or retaining employment. So deductions are very carefully monitored on federal projects. The only thing that doesn't require the worker's authorization would be a court-ordered deduction, and that is one where we require that they just send us a copy of the front page of the court order to show that that's actually what they're taking out. Another act is QASA. That's the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. It was from 1962, and it kind of consolidated a lot of different work hours regulations into one. Basically, for our purposes, it says any hours over 40 in the work week must be paid at time and a half the base hourly rate. And it applies to prime contracts greater than $100,000. You may occasionally have one smaller than that. I can't think of the last time I did. The QASA violations also can end up with liquidated damages, which is $10 per worker per day. It can add up. We actually have in the works right now with Department of Labor a contractor who deliberately fudged things to avoid paying as much overtime as they should. They did what they called thirding, and we're working to assess the liquidated damages, and it's over $2,000, and they're already paying like $80,000 in restitution, and they could be debarred. So you want to make sure that your contractors understand, no, don't mess with it. Especially now with ERA projects, with the stimulus projects, Department of Labor has let us know more than once that they've hired new investigators, and they're going to take an active interest in the stimulus-funded projects in the Valley. They've really not been a presence, the local DOL office, but they will be now. So does anybody have any questions on that so far? Yes? Thirding, okay, thirding is like this. They actually pay them straight time. Like, say the guy works 15 hours that day, and that takes him into 5 hours of overtime. They pay him straight time for all 15 hours, but they only report 12. Okay, I might have the numbers wrong because I'm not a math person, and I did figure it out on paper, but basically they're paying straight time for all the hours and only reporting 2/3 of the hours, so that would be 10. They report 10 hours. They say they paid him overtime for 2 of those hours, but actually what they did was pay him straight time for all 15 hours. And the contractor that we're dealing with actually had the little formula written down and gave it to the foreman. So they are nailed.
Did that come through in the interview? How did did you find out that the...
You know, the interesting thing about this contractor, and if you do this job long enough, you start to know things. I had this contractor on a project 5 years ago, a little project, and the workers disappeared, tried not to talk to me, and the ones I did talk to, I just knew that there was something up with this contractor, and I couldn't pin them down on anything. And what happened was really they mistreated their workers. They got a little, you know, they were on a big light rail project. They were on more than one of them. They got a little cocky. They got a little greedy. They started doing it a little too much. They had a project superintendent who was really kind of verbally abusive, who said, you don't like it, go home, get a different job. You sign this, or you can't have your paycheck, and you got to go in and talk to so-and-so and get your paycheck from her, and you don't want to talk to her, you know, just that kind of thing. So when the project started winding down, the workers had our cards, because we had interviewed a lot of these workers, and we knew there was something wrong because we went out one time, and the worker that we interviewed got pulled off by the superintendent into the truck, and as we were leaving, we could see the superintendent yelling at him for talking to us. So we knew something was up, but there was only so much we could do. And eventually when the work started winding down and people were being laid off and they didn't work for the contractor anymore, they started saying, you know what, remember these girls that came out and talked to us? Let's go talk to them. And there were actually Fair Labor Standards Act violations too, which if they had dealt with us, they would have only been nailed for Davis-Bacon, but they balked at working with us, so they went to Department of Labor, and so they were caught on a bunch of things. So that's 30. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, so that's Copeland, or QASA. Those are the Davis-Bacon and related acts. That's what you'll be monitoring and enforcing on this project. The wage determinations, that's how we know what's prevailing in the area. If he's a carpenter in Maricopa County, he must be paid this much base hourly rate and this much fringe benefit rate. There's not always a fringe benefit rate. If you look at the wage decision, you can kind of flip through it and see that every classification is different. One of the things that's very difficult for contractors who haven't done very many federal jobs is that if somebody doesn't know what he's doing, and he's never been a carpenter, and he's not good at being a carpenter, but he's out there with a hammer and nails, and he's hammering nails into wood, he's a carpenter and must be paid accordingly. You can't say it's all done by laborers. That's not how it works. So they must be classified according to the work they're doing, and it's regardless of any personal or contractual agreement, and it's regardless of any experience or skill. One of the goals is that on public works projects, contractors will hire skilled tradespeople rather than somebody off the corner who doesn't know what they're doing. And so we get a better product. The wage decisions are modified periodically. Department of Labor conducts surveys throughout the country. They survey the contracting community and the unions, and they modify the wage decisions. That's how they determine what is prevailing in the area. We just finished providing them the information on all of our projects for the last year for the heavy wage decision and the residential and the building. The highway wage decision is actually now surveyed through ADOT because they have a program that captures all the information. So that's kind of modified. It hasn't been modified since August. But the others will be, a brand new wage decision will be issued. But they are modified periodically. And this is important when it comes to bidding. When you issue your bid documents, it will have the most current appropriate wage decision in it. But that wage decision, if modified by Department of Labor prior to 10 days before the bid date, it must be incorporated into the bid documents by addendum, and that's the one that will be used. At 10 days prior to bid date, you can then lock it in. But up until that time, it is subject to change, and you have to let contractors know that during the bidding process so that they'll be looking for an addendum if it changes. It must be included in the bid documents, and it must be included in the contract, and in all subcontracts, and in all lower tier subcontracts. Christine and I were just discussing that one of the things that can happen is a prime contractor forgets to incorporate the wage decision and the federal language into their subcontract, and the subcontractor does not pay prevailing rates. The subcontractor does not have to pay that restitution. They might go ahead and do it, but the ultimate responsibility will be on the prime contractor because they did not do the right thing. They didn't include all that information. So you need to emphasize, we've actually started requiring the prime contractor provide us with copies of all of their executed subcontracts, because there's just been so much of that that we've decided we're going to make sure ahead of time so we don't have to deal with it down the road.
That provision is written into our contract too, our boilerplate. They have to provide copies of all their subcontractors' contracts.
So we review all of the invoices, all of the
We being Mary Kay?
we review all the subcontractors'
Payroll.
payroll information as well.
Well, the prime pays the sub. We review both. So, yeah.
Technically, how it's supposed to work is the prime contractor is supposed to review the subcontractor's payrolls and make sure they're right. Do they do it? No. No. I review everybody's payrolls and make sure they're right. And it can be a very tedious job. Once you've had 10 or 15 payrolls from a contractor and their math is good, then you can kind of spot check, just check the deductions, check the classifications. You don't have to do the math. But in the beginning, a lot of times, they handwrite their payrolls. And so you have to check the math. You have to deduct the deductions. You have to do all of that. The survey process, just for future reference, if you get a survey from the Department of Labor, get hold of them and say, what can I do? And you need to encourage your contractors to respond to these surveys, because that is our voice as part of the contracting community. That's our voice on what is prevailing in the area. And it's very important. If only the unions respond, then the wages are going to be a lot higher than actually probably are. If no unions respond, the wages might be a little lower. So we want to encourage all of the contracting community to respond to any surveys. Types of construction and wage determinations. The highway wage determination is the one that's in the park and ride, but there are more than one kind of wage decision. You have residential, building, heavy, and highway. Residential is single-family houses or apartment buildings, 4 stories or less. Building is a little bit more complicated. It's any kind of sheltered enclosure. I put a picture of the Coliseum. Technically, if that were built with federal money, it would be under the building wage decision. It's also apartments that are more than 4 stories high. Heavy is kind of a catch-all. It's anything that doesn't fall into the other categories. And then highway, obviously, is highways, but it's also parking lots, runways, that kind of thing. So if we look at the Matthew Henson Housing Project, when that was built, those are single-story apartments. That's a residential wage decision. How about the Pecos Park and Ride? Highway. These weren't necessarily federal jobs. I mean, Matthew Henson was. Huh? Yeah, it was. This lake and pier, it doesn't really fall under the others. It's going to be heavy. And then the Orpheum Lofts, if that were built with federal money, well, it's residential, but it's more than 4 stories high. It's a building wage decision. How about Hope 6? Hope 6 was an interesting combination of things, because it's 4 stories or less, but it also had commercial properties. So technically, it could have had 2 wage decisions. We didn't monitor that, so I'm not sure what they went ahead and did with that. We probably would have put the building and residential wage decisions in there. And that is not something that's that uncommon. You typically would have that. I had one project that was renovating a post office, and it was going to serve two separate purposes, and then there was all this parking lot, so we had 2 wage decisions. I had a project that had 3 wage decisions in it. It can be a bit of a logistic nightmare when you're doing on-site interviews because you have to know what part they're working on. But it is possible to have, I suppose, up to 4 wage decisions. I've never had that. So this is our instructions for contractors, and I just left this in here because I want to talk about eligibility. The issuing the contract, yes?
I'm sorry, go back to the decisions. Our park and ride that we just left, is that just one wage decision?
Oh, the highway, yeah. Park and ride.
Structures in it also, the awnings and the small building, the rest of the facilities, that doesn't fall under a different wage system? Will highways cover that type of construction?
No.
Bricklayer, how do you determine?
Well, here's what happens. You have to look at the total project cost. If you have a significant amount of commercial building and it equals over $1 million, or it's more than 20% of the project, then you would incorporate 2 different wage decisions. The awnings actually are part of a park and ride. So if you have a guard shack and a bathroom, you know, or something.
And that's right, I've gone through all this, but park and ride, the highway really pretty much talks a lot of flat concrete, that type of stuff, to where awnings, you have a lot of steel, things like that. Will the wage decision be determined for that steel work within that, or how do you make that determination?
There is a process in place, and we have it later on.
Okay, I'm sorry if I got ahead of you.
No, that's okay. It's a good question because this is going to happen with almost any wage decision in any project. For instance, the building wage decision almost never has an elevator mechanic. And yet, if you're going to build a commercial building that's more than 4 stories high, you're probably going to have an elevator. And you have no classification in wage rate. So there is a process called the additional classification request that accommodates that. We did a lot of additional classifications on the light rail because Department of Labor had us put the heavy wage decision in it, and the heavy wage decision did not account for any of the stuff that the street work, the stations, yeah, all of that. So you get pretty good at it after a while.
But it's kind of important, though, that if that's the case, that you determine that up front as early as possible, so that you
Right.
can request those classifications at the beginning of the project, because then the payroll's going to be in.
Well, you cannot do anything about it until after the project is awarded.
Right.
And that's one of the things in our pre-bid meetings. We do let contractors know that we're aware that that's probably an issue and that they need to understand the criteria and bid accordingly. And we'll cover that in a few slides. I just want to point out here some of the important parts of prior to construction. At contract award, one of the important things is to make sure that your prime contractor is eligible to do business, to do a federal project. And that website right there is where you would check that.
Wheeler's good.
Yeah, they are.
Checked Wheeler.
Yeah. You want the prime contractor to check eligibility of every subcontractor, but they don't do it, so we do. We check.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something that the person in procurement would be responsible for?
For the prime contractor. Yeah. Whoever's working on the contract issue. I don't know how you guys are done. Our bid specs people that issue the contract, they're the ones that do that. There aren't that many who are debarred.
Yeah, we're not going to get down this road.
Usually if they're debarred, they don't bid, but, you know, you still have to check, because if an auditor comes, like, I'm going to audit this project, I'm going to look for that. Because if the DOL or the funding agency comes and audits, they're going to look for that. And the whole idea is to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row so the auditor doesn't say, bad City of Phoenix, bad City of Goodyear, no more money for you. We don't want that. We always hold a labor compliance pre-construction conference. We may be doing some things a little differently as far as certifying people for a year and that kind of thing, but right now it is mandatory for all contractors and subcontractors. We have a labor standard certification form, but you guys have that awesome form that's in your contract that they're going to put in every subcontract. That's terrific. We want to do that, but they won't let us yet. And then the other forms as applicable, we have, Christine has those forms that account for fringe benefits. If they're going to take credit for payment into a fringe benefit plan, they need to provide fringe benefit information because we need to be making sure that it's a bona fide fringe benefit plan, and we will cover what that means. And again, the additional classification requests. We asked them to bring that to the pre-construction conference so that we can get that going right away. Department of Labor has gone back and forth between being really quick on those and then being really slow on those. If you get to the end of a project and there are additional classification requests hanging, you can't close the project out because you don't know yet whether what they paid their workers is the right wage or not. So we try to get those going early. Uh-huh.
If you're doing that after the contract's awarded at the pre-construction conference and you received a bid, are you expecting that they made some kind of allowance to make sure if there's additional classes in there that are not covered under the classification you gave them? Or how
What
do you
we
make
tell
that
them,
dollar difference?
what we tell them at the pre-bid is to bid according to the criteria, and we give them the criteria. We also tell them that if they call us, we can tell them whether the Department of Labor has approved and what they've approved for that classification on this type of project. We don't always have that, but we have a pretty good history. So you can guide people, but you can't tell them what to pay their workers. They need to use their best common sense and the criteria.
But the minimums are there, though. They have to pay minimums, according to Davis Bacon.
Right, but if the classification's not in there, one of the criteria is that the new classification would have to fall into alignment with the other skilled trades. In other words, you couldn't ask for an iron worker at less than the cement mason rate. It would have to make sense in the context of the wage decision, and we'll cover that in a minute. These two signs plus the wage decision, which Christina is showing you, must be posted on the job site at all times. I put little stickers there with my name and phone number and all that so that the workers, because this has to be accessible to the workers. They need to be able at any time they want to walk up there, read the sign, look at the wage decision, and see if they're being paid the right wages. It is a requirement. For some reason, contractors don't like to do it. Department of Labor will stop work if they show up on the project and those postings aren't up there. They will stop work until the postings are up there. Have I ever seen them do it? No. But
When you go out there and they're not up there, you just tell the foreman.
right, I'll usually call the contractor and say, hey, you need to get the posters out there. I tried being tougher on that, and I got got put in my place. So, city council members don't like it when contractors call them and complain about me. She's being mean. She stopped construction, and we're trying to get this done. And of course, part of the problem here is that the contractor and the project manager want to move this project forward, get it done on time, and we're slowing it down. So, but Department of Labor doesn't care what city council members say, and they will stop construction. And according to them, they're going to be showing up on projects now. We'll see. Okay, request for additional classifications. Here's the criteria. The work is not already accounted for in the wage decision. In other words, if you have an elevator mechanic and you want a lower rate, you can't call it something else, but it's actually an elevator mechanic. If it's already accounted for in the wage decision, you have to use that. The classification is a real one that's used in the area in the construction industry. And then the final one, the proposed rate bears a reasonable relationship to the other wage rates contained in the wage decision. For example, you're not going to ask for a cement mason at less than the general labor rate. Although all the wage decisions have cement masons, but they don't all have bricklayers. So the bricklayer, you look at it, you say, what is it comparable to? It's comparable to a cement mason, so we could ask for it at around that rate. One of the big mistakes is to say, well, I usually pay this guy $10 an hour, so I'm going to ask for it at $10 an hour. It can't be what you normally pay the guy. It has to be something that falls into line. If the iron workers, which they do, make $36 an hour, and you're asking for an ornamental iron worker, you don't need to ask for it at $36 an hour, but you might want to ask for it at somewhere in the skilled trade level. Truck drivers and power equipment operators don't figure into that. They're kind of separate. The only time you would look at that is if you're actually asking for a piece of power equipment that's not in the wage decision, then you would make it fall into line there. Does that make sense?
It does. I understood how you get to it, where my concern was, my instruction bidders, my bidding entities out there, were not privy to the Davis Bank. We gave them an act, and it was something that didn't fall within that act. So when they gave me a dollar amount, I got a locked-in dollar amount. I took a little bid, a little qualified bid, and I'm running forward with that. There's a possibility of discrepancy there without being identified. They said, hey, I can pay this guy because it's not identified in the act that they gave me, in the decision they gave me, $10 an hour. When they actually get down and we start doing the reclassification, we say, hey, the iron worker portion of this, even though it was streets or heavy, the iron worker portion of this wasn't identified now, but it is in this section of it. He's a $36 an hour guy. I can see if it's a larger job, that could have implications that would impact the bottom line. How are we as a city, how do we address that? Knowing, and again, I'm talking about specific project, parking ride one. I've got another one out there right now where I'm bidding to that this afternoon, bid opening, and I think everything's covered under the classification we have. However, now that I'm seeing this,
But it's in
I
the
need to go
contract.
deeper.
It's in the contract, though.
First of all,
Well, we gave them a specific.
For
rate
example-
determination. That's what they bid to.
well, we did on the park and ride too, right?
Yeah.
I was at the pre-bid for the park and ride, and I told the contractors, if a classification that you need is not in there, here's the criteria. You need to bid it accordingly. And if you have questions, you need to call. If they didn't, and even then, even if you didn't tell them, one of the things that is a requirement is to read the contract, the bid documents, and it's in the CFR, right there. Those three things right there are in there. If they didn't read it because they fell asleep, which is what happens when I read it, that's just, that's their responsibility if they're going to bid a federal job. But, for example, did you have a pre-bid?
Yes, we did.
And were you there? And did you tell them? You didn't tell them about the ad classes? But it is,
I wasn't administering the Davis-Bacon for this one.
oh, it was earlier?
Yeah,
Now, is this pass-through money from the city of Phoenix?
It's WIFA.
Oh, with
It's different, yeah, and that's one reason it's all the same requirements here with this, and so I'm here to reimburse myself.
But,
It's awesome.
the reality is a lot of these contractors have been bidding jobs. This is where all the construction is happening. It's
Yeah.
all coming from federal money. So
Right.
a lot of them are familiar with this.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
But one
It's
of the
in their
problems
bid
with
documents.
It is in the bid
And that's where
documents.
I gotta go,
See right there, CFR Title 29, Parts 3 and 5?
Here.
Everything I'm telling you is in there.
But unfortunately, is that identified in my bid documents, my instruction to bidders? That's what I've got to find out.
I think the WIFA,
Okay.
the federal language is in there. Did you have the same people
Yes.
put the bid documents together? They're good. They know what they're doing. It's in there. But you may want to talk to them. When are the bids due?
Bid opening
Today.
3:30 this afternoon.
But the
I'll have them talk to you.
reality, though, but what we're talking about, though, and it goes back to your point about the dollars and the classification. You were talking about a steel worker and an ornamental. It's really not going to fluctuate that dramatically if you're getting to the right position. I mean, if you're comparing it to the right class worker.
Correct.
And so I can't see that it's going to have that big an impact in terms of what your concern is, outside of the fact that we still, as the city, as the borrower, have the contract to protect us, like it protects us in so many other areas. So,
If, as does happen, this contractor bid everything at the labor rates, that's their problem.
Couldn't agree more. No, I understand. But if my instructional bidders were not inclusive of something, you know, that's where I just got.
their opportunity
This
to bring
is-
that up was at the pre-bid.
Yeah. If they looked at the wage decision, which they may not have, which does happen, and then they want to come back and say, hey, I didn't know. It was in your bid documents. I mean, honestly, why would we take the responsibility from them? They're the ones that stand to make money here. It's their job to be good business people and do a good job bidding. And most of your major contractors that are bidding jobs and winning the bids right now, they know the drill. So if they don't, I mean, you probably want to make that call case by case, and I certainly am not a contracts person, I'm not a fiscal person, I'm strictly Davis-Bacon. I go to every pre-bid and I tell them, do this. And if you don't, it's going to cost you money. So, and then this is the form, whoops. Oh, there's an appeals process at the end of the wage decision that says if you don't like the Department of Labor's response, you can write us a letter and tell us why you disagree. 99% of the time, Department of Labor is not going to change their mind. They're going to write back and say, no, we still agree with ourselves. And then there's an appeals process, but it can be several years. And a contractor who's very determined to go through with that appeals process can deposit the amount of money in question into an escrow account, which we have established a labor compliance account that's an escrow account. And then that money will be dispersed either to the workers or back to the contractor once Department of Labor has made a final determination. It's actually the Administrative Review Board, something like that. That's the form. It's available at Department of Labor. Christine, you have hard copy and electronic copies. I also have a sample. Did I give you the sample? I send that to the contractor because they fill them out wrong all the time. So I send that to them and tell them, just fill these things out, I'll do the rest. Fringe benefits, this is very important. If you looked at the wage decision, you see that some classifications have a fringe benefit requirement. The contractor has two choices. If they pay fringe benefits for their workers, they can take credit for that and offset any fringe benefit requirement by the amount that they pay per hour for the worker. Or they can put it all together and pay it to the worker in his hourly rate. A lot of the documentation calls that paying in cash. Be careful with your contractors. If they're from another country, they might take that literally. I had this one guy, bless his heart. He was from Germany, and he paid them their paycheck, their base hourly rate, and he handed them cash for the fringe benefit rate. Being a very smart man, he got a receipt on every single one of them too, so he was okay. But it actually just means pay in their hourly rate or pay to fringe benefits. If they do put it all together, time and a half is only the base hourly rate. The fringe benefit rate is always straight time. They don't have to do time and a half on the fringe benefit rate. There are funded plans. They're irrevocable contributions to a third party. They must be paid at least quarterly, no less often than quarterly. For this reason, things like profit sharing usually can't be counted as a fringe benefit. Health insurance, retirement, life insurance, vacation and sick leave is allowed. I mean, we would like that to be available to the workers, but these are unfunded plans, so the contractor must make sure that they comply with these specific rules. They must be able to reasonably expect to access these benefits. It has to be a commitment that's legally enforceable. It has to be financially responsible, and it has to be communicated to the workers in writing. So unfunded plans are allowed, but they have to meet those criteria. Profit sharing, here's the problem with profit sharing. They pay it once a year at the end of the year when they know what their profits are. Well, if their fiscal year ends in July and they're working on this project in November, how do they know how much they're going to pay per hour? So what they would have to do is deposit the amount of money that the fringe benefit rate, and at the end of the year, if the profit sharing didn't equal that much, they'd have to pay it to the worker anyway. So they might as well go ahead and pay it to the worker. Here's what they are not. Fringe benefits are not any kind of employer payments or contributions required by other law, such as Social Security or workers' compensation. Sometimes contractors who don't understand will try to say, well, workers' compensation, no. Business use of a truck and even personal use of a truck. I just had that come up because a worker called and he said, here's what they do. They pay for the truck, they pay for the maintenance, they pay the insurance, they pay the gas. I take it home. I use it as my personal vehicle when I'm not at work. Is that a fringe benefit? And I said, well, you know, that's not the same thing as letting him take it home and not being able to use it any other time other than go to and from work and while he's at work. But Department of Labor said absolutely not. Use of a company truck is not a fringe benefit. Administrative costs for the fringe benefit plan, no. They can't count that. Transportation, board, and lodging, per diem, no. People seem to get upset about that. Well, why not? Because it's incurred for the employer's benefit, not the employee's benefit. It's reasonably, properly reimbursable, and it's not part of the employee's wages. So any kind of per diem, food, lodging, if they bring them from another state or another city, that is not considered a fringe benefit. That's just something they pay. Okay, let's talk about anyone. Anyone who is performing work on the project is covered, physical construction work on the project is covered by the Davis-Bacon Act. So how about company owners? If they're performing work on the project, they're covered. They must pay themselves the minimum wage rate. What they do with the money after that, we don't care. They can put it right back into their company, but they must pay themselves the minimum rate. Relatives, the son. Keep him out of trouble this summer. I'm going to put this kid to work. He's failing in school anyway. Still got to pay him the prevailing rate. Salaried employees, yes, they are covered. And the salary must be at least the minimum rate required. So you have to record their actual hours and divide the salary by those hours and make sure that the minimum prevailing rate is met. That goes for piecework too. We don't encourage piecework, but it's not disallowed. But they must keep accurate record of the employee's hours, and if the piecework rate doesn't equal the prevailing rate, they have to pay them more. Working foreman, they're covered. There's a 20% rule, and this goes for your company owners or anyone that is more of a management type person. If they're spending 20% or more of their time actually performing work on the project, they're covered by the Davis-Bacon Act. So they must be paid at least the minimum prevailing rate for the work they're performing. If he hops up on, if he's a superintendent and all he does is supervise and he hops on the backhoe for 15 minutes, that falls under the 20% rule and you don't have to worry about it. But if Christine's out there and sees him operating the backhoe, she's going to address this issue. Hey, you didn't report this backhoe worker. And so that's the kind of thing that you need to be aware of, is that everybody's covered. Other than your executive, administrative, and clerical people, they are not covered. They're not performing physical work on the project. So an employee is anyone who is performing physical work on the project. Apprentices. That's the only time you can pay less than the prevailing rate, is if you have a certified apprentice or trainee who is registered in an approved program. The certificate of apprenticeship must be submitted with the first payroll on which the apprentice appears. The ratio of apprenticeship to journeyman must be met. Yeah, it's in whole numbers. You can't have like 1.5 people. There's no bootstrapping, and that is basically if they haven't met the ratio and so they change somebody from apprentice to journeyman, he still doesn't count in the numbers. I don't understand it, but it's not my rule. Foremen, supervisors, and those type of people can be counted as journeymen if they're on site at the same time as the apprentice. Here's an apprenticeship certification. It comes through the Department of Commerce. Just be aware that if there are apprentices on the project, this is required. And you see the ratio there down at the almost at the bottom. It's highlighted. It's 1 to 1, 1 to 3. That's the standard ratio. Sometimes they'll change that if the union has lobbied them and had their apprenticeship program approved. It might be 1 to 1 throughout. But this is the standard that you'll see, and this is how it works. If you have 1 apprentice, you can have 1 journeyman. If you have 2 apprentices, you have to have 4 journeymen because you have to add 3 more journeymen. 1 to 1 for the first apprentice, 1 to 3 for each apprentice thereafter. So if you have 3 apprentices, you have to add 7. You have to add 3 more journeymen, so you have to have a total of 7 journeymen. That's a lot. And I always tell them, here's your reminder, if you are paying less than the minimum prevailing rate as required by your contract wage determination, you better have submitted a certificate of apprenticeship, because that's the only time it's allowed. On-site interviews, they are a federal mandate. It is our primary monitoring and enforcement tool. We go out and interview the workers. It must be done during construction, not at lunchtime, not at the end of the workday, because what we do is we talk to the workers and we ask them questions, but then we observe what they're doing. And if they tell us they're a laborer, a general laborer, and then they're operating a whacker or a backhoe or welding something, well, obviously we've observed that they're not a general laborer. This is where you find most of your violations, is through your on-site interviews. The payroll review, normally you're just going to find math mistakes or things like that. The majority of your violations are found through the on-site interviews. They are confidential. You ask the supervisor, foreman, superintendent, company owner to step away. We don't tell them what the worker told us. That is only with the worker's express written permission that we reveal anything like that. The same goes for if the worker comes in and files a claim. We also do mailed interviews. They're not very productive. You usually get 1 in 10 back, maybe. But we do that if it's like for instance, your barricade setters sometimes are hard to catch. They're there for an hour first thing in the morning, and then, you're not there at the time they're there. So we'll send mailed interviews, same thing, they're confidential. This is a payroll. This is actually Department of Labor's payroll form, but contractors can use whatever payroll format they want to, as long as it provides all that information. And this gives examples on how to report different situations. Company owners, split classifications where the guy works as a carpenter part of the day and as a cement mason part of the day. You can do that. They have to keep time cards. They have to. Otherwise, they've got nothing to substantiate those hours. And that's one of your triggers on a payroll. If you're looking at a payroll and you see this guy is every day 4 and 4. That work doesn't go that way. They don't work 4 hours at this and 4 hours at this. That's one of your triggers. Your little red flag. That and 7 laborers and 1 skilled tradesperson, that's another red flag. So that's just an example. Department of Labor's form is fillable on their website, and it does the math, which I like. It's easy to understand, but again, they're not required to use that. And this is the infamous statement of compliance. This is what makes it a certified payroll. And this is the little clause I was talking about that they like to leave off when they create their own. Okay, that's it. That's what I have for you. Is there anything else? Anything you wanted me to cover, Christine?
That was it. I guess just maybe some examples of things that you ran into that you probably wouldn't have expected, or just unusual case situations. I mean, we've got the park and ride. We're going to have somebody else do the contract administration on the WIFA project. Water line replacement project is coming up. But with the park and ride so close, I think that's the one thing that, well, some of us are focused on.
You might want to call me about the shade canopies, because we've been doing some research on that, because typically we've said, no, it's iron worker. But it's really not. And some wage decisions will say iron worker rebar. Well, they're not doing rebar. So we've been doing some research, and I'm not sure what the final determination, I need to know because I've got a park ride coming up, but we're not positive, I'm not positive what the final determination is, so call me next week, because I'll,
Do you have any audits from ADOT? Because I know when they build park and rides, those structures are already considered highway. That's how their park and rides were done.
park and rides fall under the highway wage determination. But within that wage determination, the iron worker rate, I'm not sure, is the highway the one that says iron worker rebar? Somebody look.
Yes, it does.
This specifies rebar. So you're not talking structural ironwork, you're not talking shade canopy ironwork, you're talking rebar. And by the way, if they're tying rebar, they're an iron worker. And they try not to do that, especially if they're tying rebar to pour concrete. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, they're concrete workers, or they're cement masons, or they're form setters. No, they're iron workers if they're tying rebar.
I'm sure you wouldn't have any on the highway, and they wouldn't have anything that addresses framing or.
No. Well, they'll have a carpenter, I think. I'm pretty sure almost all the wage decisions.
Well, what about the, like, you got a concrete guy, he's tying the rebar that goes from four to the, many contractors will have various personnel that are multitask. So when performing this task is this, and all of a sudden do something else, is that what they gotta do?
They have two choices. They can pay him the highest rate for all of his hours, or they can keep time cards that the worker fills out. I worked as tying rebar for 3 hours, I poured concrete for 2 hours, and I finished concrete for 3 hours.
So like work orders, you just have a work order thing?
I recommend to every contractor that if you're going to do split classifications, have the worker fill it out, have the foreman verify it. That way, if any question comes up, you have it documented that your payroll is accurate and true. It's a very good point.
They can have used a lot of time do the same one. Sometimes they're not in big, but this type of work could be.
Yeah, rarely do they have one guy that ties the rebar and everybody comes behind him and does the other stuff, you know. No.
On the highway, trust me, on building, that's very common. You got a rebar tire and a concrete, it's not even the same
Right.
company sometimes. It's different companies even, so it depends on what you're doing.
Also, just talk a little bit about how you administer the mandatory conference with the prime and the subs in the room. Just an overview. I don't want you to go through the whole thing, but what basically do you make sure that you cover?
With the pre-construction conference, first of all, it's really hard to get across to the prime contractor that this is mandatory. For some reason, they can get their subcontractors to the project manager's pre-con meeting, but not to ours. Part of that is that a lot of the contractors have done quite a few federal jobs, and they don't think they need it. So what I do is if their subcontractors don't show up, I make them schedule another one, or I'll make them have their own and certify in writing that they have trained all of their subcontractors. So we make it mandatory because you never know when something's going to come up that people need to know. And with ERA funding, we want everything. We don't want anybody to come back and say we didn't know. We want to show the federal government that we use the stimulus funds wisely and that we enforced the prevailing wages on the project. For the pre-construction meeting, one thing I do is I send the contractor, the prime contractor, the packet, and I tell them, you send this to all of your subcontractors. Bring the labor standard certification form and the request for additional classification to the meeting. Do they do it? Rarely. But we do discuss it. At that one pre-con meeting, we discuss the additional classification quite thoroughly because I'll make them look at the wage decision. I'll say, have you looked at the wage decision? is there a classification you need that's not in there? And people will ask questions, well, what about this work? What about that work? And that's one of the main focuses of the pre-construction meeting, is to get that nailed down. I prepare an agenda, and I think you have a copy, that basically I go through the laws, I go through what we do, what we expect prior to construction, during construction, and then I cover classifications. I always tell contractors, please do not look at this wage decision and say, I usually pay Joe $15 an hour, and looky here, this truck driver's $15 an hour, so I'll just call him a truck driver. No, don't do that. Finally, I address withholding. One of the things that isn't popular, well, I'd also address restitution. They have to pay restitution. If they underpay a worker, they have to pay restitution. And if they can't find the worker, because they've dragged their feet for weeks and weeks and weeks, the worker's gone, as happens with construction, they're gone. They're gone right after they're done, or you've let them go, or whatever, they just didn't show up. Then they have to write the check to us, and we have to try to find the worker. And if we can't find the worker, the money goes back to Department of Labor, actually to the federal funding agency. The money doesn't belong to the contractor. It belongs to the worker, and if he doesn't claim it, it belongs to the federal government. And finally, withholding. If we can't achieve compliance, then we will withhold funds from the prime contractor. If the prime contractor isn't the one with the problem, the subcontractor is the one not complying, chances are good the prime contractor is going to withhold from the subcontractor. We will withhold funds from the progress payments. We try to do it without touching retention, mainly because contractors have been known to walk away from retention. It's not enough money to matter to them. But if you're withholding from a progress payment, they'll start to address the issues. Anything else you heard me talk about you want me to bring up?
Fabricating on site, and whether they are a classification or not.
What I wanted to know was, when I'm reviewing the payroll, or we're all reviewing it, what happens if we do find a discrepancy between the rates and what they're actually paying? What is our step? Do we report to the project manager? Do we report? What route do we go? Who do we report?
Well, it depends on how you're setting it up, but I do, on major projects, I do a monthly payroll review and send a letter out, and I list the,
Who do you send a letter to?
to the prime contractor. Yeah, I notify the prime contractor, and I leave it up to them to address it to their subcontractors. Yeah.
Do you, the project manager, I'm sure it's being set up the same way we are. They've got project managers working, project representatives for the contractor, and they're the ones approving monthly payouts. Do you notify the project manager? Should they notify us so we can make the adjustments if they don't meet the requirements and there's going to be funds withheld for a violation of the payment and the wage determination? We can make that notification. We do that. I'm just curious how we're not quite structured as Phoenix is, so I'll make sure we capture.
We don't know how we'll be structured soon. I have always copied the project manager, but I was told to stop because they didn't want to see him.
Not the case where
No, it
we
won't
want to
be.
see them because
Yeah.
let me help you hammer, you know.
That would seem intuitive to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of our project managers never read them, and they didn't want to see them.
Can I get a job with Phoenix?
I know.
Golly.
One of the things that happens with withholding is that there's a notice of intent. 30 days, 15 days, if you're like pushing towards the end of the project, you can give a 15, but that's sent out certified mail to the contractor, and we always copy the project manager. But what we also have is our fiscal people, where we tell them too, hey, we're withholding on this project. But yeah, that is copied to the project manager. That notice of intent says you have until this date to correct these issues, or we're going to withhold so much money from your next progress payment. And then if they don't meet it, if they don't meet that deadline, then we send the certified letter with a copy to the project manager and to fiscal and God and everybody else, withhold this much money from the next project progress payment. So
Do Do you attend the weekly project meetings?
I do when I can. It's very helpful, like Pete always does. It's very helpful on a long-term project. It's very helpful to at least attend some of the project meetings. But like on light rail, I ended up not able to do it. I just had boxes of payrolls come in, constant. You know, each project had 60 or more subcontractors, and so I did not have time to attend a lot of meetings. I was lucky if I got on site once a month. So, yeah, but it is helpful because you can take the update letter right there and say, here are the, you know, and it becomes part of the minutes. And so then everyone that's a stakeholder is aware that there are labor compliance concerns.
And then when you're out doing inspections on the site, do you take notes?
I have a
You
form.
take pictures and notes, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, our form has observations down at the bottom, and I'll flip it over and write even more. The better your observations, the better your pictures, the more likely you are to be able to resolve a problem. And Department of Labor, if they ever get involved, they love it when you have pictures. They just think that's the greatest thing. I don't know why. But it is helpful. We had a contractor who did the paving stones all over the light rail stations, all over the place. And I had them on a project several years, much smaller project, and I knew there was something wrong. And I kept trying to catch them, and I couldn't catch them. Well, because light rail was so huge and it was so all day, every day for months, you had a better opportunity to really find out what was going on the project. Whereas on my other project, they were there for a week and then gone. And they were kind of like calling their foreman the skilled trade, and it was kind of more of a favoritism thing. This is our guy, he speaks English, so we're going to pay him more and call him this. And people were not being paid properly. It's just, what we did was took pictures of them as they were operating this machine or as they were laying the paved stone, and we'd write their name on the picture, you know, and it'd be part of the on-site interview, and we're meeting with them saying, really? So-and-so did so? Oh, we didn't know that. Really? Because so-and-so did it too. Oh, really?
Whose job is that gonna be?
For the park and ride.
I don't think Mary Kay will be going on.
You got contract administration or with them, man.
One of the things you probably want to do,
Pay that.
You know how much I'm having to pay for that?
you may want to arrange for some inspector safety training type stuff, and you need to have all the personal protective equipment.
Yeah, I got that, yeah.
But we go through every couple of years, we have OSHA come and do a refresher for us, and then the city has a 6 or 8 module inspector training safety. I went through that one too. Because that, more than anything, it's so I can look at the contractor and say, I am allowed to be here. I'm OSHA certified for inspections, and I'm City of Phoenix certified, and I'm Metro certified for on-site inspections. I probably know more about it than your workers do. And I still got hurt a couple times. I stepped backwards one time into a hole that had rebar sticking up from it, and it was bad. And I did this. I'm fine. I got in my car, I drove down the block, I went,
Pull this rebar out.
Debbie, what about art on the project?
oh yeah, we were going to talk about on-site and off-site fabrication, so let's because that figures in. If the fabrication is, for instance, artwork, which I actually was in charge of all the art installation on the light rail projects. Each station has artwork. The fabrication, if it's off-site and it's fabricated someplace that's always there, it's not someplace that's established and dedicated just to the project, then it's not covered. That work is not covered. But once they bring it to the project site and they start installing it, it's covered.
Painted.
Huh?
Is installing and painting the same thing? They bring it out and they're painting it on site, it's covered.
Right. Is it?
Fabricating and painting is what I'm curious.
They're painting on site?
I don't know.
Oh,
We
okay.
haven't heard yet what this is going to be, but it could be something involving a fence it's something in the pavement, like crosswalks?
Right, right.
Yeah. I think so.
It's going to be fabricated on site?
It'll be more work into the structures and so forth. It's not gonna be a standalone piece of art.
And it's not gonna be performed by a separate entity other than people doing the normal work, they just be laying in patterns or doing something.
There may be a little bit
Yeah.
like of a, maybe like a mosaic on a column or something like
Yeah.
that. That would be an artist kind of doing that, but they would obviously have on the outside.
It's really interesting because with art and artists, you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And that's kind of, because I'm the least linear person in our section, that's kind of how I ended up with that. And I just kind of went case by case on the art. But it is kind of fun because the artists will say, well, my buddy always helps me, and I just give him a six-pack. Well, okay, but you can't. I mean, you can give him a six-pack, but you also have to pay him. Well, we're flying down, and I'm paying for his hotel room, and then, we're going to hang out by the pool, and I don't have to pay him. I'm feeding him. Unfortunately, you have to pay him. See, it was...
You can't give them one of the
Yeah. Well,
kickback, right?
Well, if he's not on payroll,
It's my star.
sign him up. No, I can't take that.
but if he's not on the payroll, and that happens a lot with artists, how
You actually have to treat, here's the thing, if it is part of the overall contract, it's Wheeler, right?
Yeah.
If Wheeler is actually in charge of the installation and their workers are going to do it, then Wheeler's going to report them.
Right, yeah, that's why I was asking, but if they,
But if the artist,
perfect example, $100 million project, $500,000 art piece setting out front.
That's a standalone piece.
That's a standalone piece, not paid by the prime contractor, so it would fall into that type of thing.
It's under a separate contract and it's not paid with our funds.
Not paid with art.
But this project, if it's as Luke is describing, we are installing a crosswalk,
With some decorative,
things in it.
Pavers, but that's gonna be put in by the guys doing regular pavers, it's gonna lay into a pattern that somebody designed.
but you do have times when the artist wants to be involved in the installation.
Right.
And I had to treat the artist kind of as a prime contractor. And either they,
That's kind of where I'm going, because I have a feeling this piece is gonna come in after the prime contract
it'll be under Wheeler.
It is?
We plan on having the art underneath Wheeler.
is part of the bid.
Is part of contingency or something.
we had that. We had it that way
Okay.
on light rail where Archer Western was the prime contractor who did the station finishes. And they did install a lot of the artwork and just report it as part of their regular everyday activities. Then we did have some where the artist came, for instance, at the central station, there's this decorative, it's really pretty. There's the handrails and then there's this decorative wrought iron, it's really beautiful. The artist came with a crew and installed that. And he gave me a certification form and payrolls and reported it. He was one of the easy ones to work with. He just did it. But there was kind of combination projects where the construction contractor did some of it and then the artist came in and did the pretty stuff.
Right.
So there was a lot of different ways and I just kind of made it fit as best I could.
And, well, I mean, my experience is most art projects, generally, your artist and personnel performing that artwork don't have any problem meeting the wage requirements. Reporting may be a challenge for you, but they're generally paid much better than what the average guy putting mosaic tile on the wall to an artist. He's getting paid much more than the average tile setter setting tile on the wall.
Oh,
If
true.
you never have a problem with meeting the requirements, your problem's gonna be
Getting them to submit the payroll.
document that for you. They're not
Absolutely.
accustomed to that, but they're always paid usually much, the guys that set the art piece, the guys are making tremendous money.
Right, because the artist isn't going to pick somebody up off the corner to put his creation in.
Paid enough, they just.
No, this is
documentation
Arizona.
goes.
We hire them from other states.
I know.
Hey,
I was here for the
I
pottery on
will say her
51.
name, but her initials are Diane Craig, okay?
I'd say about 2/3 of the artwork on the station finishes were local and about 1/3. One from New York, the one at Central Station, that's really cool. I like weird art anyway. And some from Seattle and Oregon and places. They must,
It's like a bid
You have
process.
these things in those places and you wanted to get some results.
Most of the artist people, the art community, they want recognition, they want ever, Donald Lipsky did that one, they want that national recognition.
yeah.
We dealt with the same thing, a lot of people, why do you use a local artist thing, this is, Christina identified it, we didn't understand it, but we're not in charge of the art program.
I think it's interesting to get the perspective of an artist from another state. What, like, some of them, basically they tried to incorporate wherever that station is, they tried to incorporate the culture surrounding that station, and some of them are like, really? Interesting perspective.
But the way we do it here in the city is we go out for an RFQ. We evaluate what the artist sends into us.
Right.
And the art council and people from the art group here in the city
Yeah.
evaluate these pictures that they have, and then they select based on that. We do a separate contract for the artist. It's not part of the parking lot, it's a separate contract for the artist.
Right.
Ornamental work and stuff.
And the artist.
But because it's a part of this project, you need to look at it. And if the installation is done by the prime contract, then it is part of the contract.
Right.
And if it's federally funded, it's federally funded. So the art itself and the fabrication of the art and all that part of the contract isn't covered, but the actual installation at the project site is covered.
See, Diane Craig was not heading towards that when she used to.
It's usually not huge. I mean, for light rail, it was huge because there are so many stations, but it's usually just 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 things. It's not usually huge. I personally thought, why cover this? But that was basically, the research was done. I was like, yeah, cover it. So I did, and I worked with the artists, and most of them did real well. Some of them were like, I don't pay them. Like I said, it's just very odd. But, and getting the payrolls from some of them was a challenge. The other thing you want to think about with that was on the light rail project, they did some abatement and demolition of buildings, where they bought the buildings and they abated and demolished them to make room for the light rail. But that wasn't actually part of the federal funding. And some of it was under $2,000. And Department of Labor required that we cover all of that anyway because it was part of the project as a whole. So when you're looking at the art, you're looking at, is it part of the project, the whole project? Yeah, it is.
We talked about that, and because it is going to be integrated into the project, that's the only way the federal funds can be spent toward it, then it's part of the project. That's the way she's going to have to apply the art. But I had a question. Oh, for this park and ride, we are doing fill. We're hauling dirt from one site to a retention basin, and we're dumping the dirt in to get it to the proper elevation. So whatever company does that is going to have to be, there'll be a subcontractor, and in the wage determination, we have to find the proper classification for some kind of a vehicle operator or a dirt hauler or something like that.
There's the dump trucks and all.
Dump truck, compactor.
Here's the rule on trucking. If they are coming from a location that is not part of the project site and is not dedicated to the project site or established for this project, and they are driving onto the project and they are having dirt loaded into the truck and then they're driving it to a landfill, they are not covered under the Davis-Bacon Act. That is hauling. If they come to the project site and they get dirt and then they drive to another part of the project site and they dump the dirt, they are covered.
What if the street dirt is stockpiled and transporting it to the site?
Yeah, hauling from a site to a site and dump it, that's not.
To the project.
If it is a site that is dedicated to the project and established for the project,
Like
yes.
stockpile?
If it's for the project,
Establish the project.
if it's,
Let me describe this a little more specifically so you know
Okay.
what we're getting at. We have a city facility, and we have dirt that we've been storing in back of that city facility specifically for this project.
And it's a part of the project.
So the dirt was stored there because it was on our property. Was it our property or the farmer's property?
It's our problem.
It's our property, so it's on our city property.
We own the farmer's property.
Is that Duncan
We've been
property?
storing it on city property for the intent to bring it to the project site.
and you've been getting it from other projects? or-
Various,
Shoot
yeah.
shoot me an email, that's a new one.
Good.
It was.
That's new.
We're outside the
This stockpile
box.
was established for this project.
Dirt was excavated from for a city retention basin. That dirt that she's talking about.
It's a city retention basin that's not part of this project
all of it.
site, though.
Almost. It came from the water treatment plant.
I just don't want the feds to come back and say, okay, how much of it?
But regardless, I think, regardless of where it came from, it was stockpiled for this job.
Right, but if you think about it,
Yeah, it's not clear.
That one's
Well,
not
and some of
clear.
it wasn't was stockpiled before even this job existed.
right,
That's
and that's,
Some
this
of it-
is not a
Some of it
local.
was stockpiled, you know.
Is this city yard dedicated specifically and only and established for this project, or is it, you
Not
use it for another project too?
City facility building.
Would we use that same site for another project?
But
Is that
if
what
you're
you're
gonna
asking?
Dirt.
For another
But listen, if
project?
you're
Oh.
gonna
The same
construct
dirt.
something and you're gonna use this
Ah, that's a
material as
good
a part of that
question.
site, why is it considered a part of the project? Does it make sense that it wouldn't be?
What?
If you have dirt that you're hauling to a project, that is a part of the cost of that project, so why would it not be considered?
paying a
I'm looking at it from a
company.
capital or infrastructure thing, it would be a part of the project.
You know, it's,
I mean, we build, when I worked for ADOT, I worked for ADOT for a long time, and we do a lot of roads, a lot of bridges.
right, and they
And
do
they
a
were
lot of
hauling
this.
stuff from
Yeah.
all over.
Yeah.
And those were considered a part of the site. So when we recorded the federal and we went for our federal reimbursement, that was a part of our cost for that facility or
It
site.
just, it's a very, it's called the Midway decision, and it was in the late eighties that Department of Labor made this delineation between what is project site and what is not project site, and when are truckers covered and when are they not covered. This is an unusual question, and we need to look at it.
Sure.
Normally, if they go for the ADOT projects, ADOT has a project that is massive in area, and they'll be going over here to this part of the project site, or just outside the project site, to an area that was dedicated to the project site and established for this project. This particular stockpiling, were you stockpiling this dirt for this project
Yes.
before the project began?
Yes.
So it's always been dedicated for this project.
Yes.
And right now, you wouldn't have another project come and take some of
No.
that dirt.
We
So
would,
it's possible it's covered.
There's 25 or 30,000 yards of dirt that the contractor is responsible for finding and getting from somewhere on his own. So that would definitely not be part of the project.
Right, if he goes down to the river bottom or whatever,
It's
you know,
up,
it's
he
dirt.
has to figure out where that comes from. So that's dirt that would definitely not be part of the
Right,
project.
right.
It's really, really strange, and,
no, it's different, it's unique, it's innovative, it's,
no, I mean the whole Midway decision.
Oh,
Prior
yeah.
to that, it was like truckers were covered. And now they're not.
you know, because we've been doing this, we've been planning for this project. So we've been phasing this project for 10 years. We knew we were gonna get to construction at some point, hopefully before I died. And so that dirt pile was there, and we always knew it was gonna be for construction. It wasn't until last year when we were worried that we weren't gonna have enough money, that there was some concern about what to do with the dirt. It's growing weeds and everything, so it's been there a
But it's
while.
always been dedicated.
Always been dedicated for that project.
It's very likely that is.
I'll email it to you
I
anyway,
can dice
just so I'm sure.
Email
I will.
Chris, we'll be interested to
Okay.
take a look
Good.
at it.
Does anybody else have any more questions? Mary Kay, you good on payroll?
Rest of me was
Yes,
stuff.
I am now.
Here's for you guys.
Ah, thank you, really, that's a lot.
Thank you very much.
Me?
Thanks for the questions too. I love hearing new stuff.
We just got another one for you.
Another new question?
Well, it's a bunch of other documents.
Dear.
Uh-huh.
Good job.
You build your love.
What are your thoughts?
We have, in our front end documents. we don't have that requirement. We have goals, and we have tried to attain goals. We make sure we identify these are goals, and we hope to achieve that, but we don't have them for actually.
I would leave this in and take this out.
Just take out the fact that it needs to be submitted as a bid,
Right.
and this will come 10 days after they execute the contract. We have to have a certification. We want certification of the contract.
I'd eliminate that,
Okay, all right.
and that way,
Well, we're right
this
now-
blocks the things. After they execute a subcontract, then they have to.
10 days
We're
to
just-
get me the tribute, right. That's
just not-
that's
that's
all on the field business stuff. I didn't know
what
what the form, because I asked you.
Oh, I wish it was.
We were so struggling with
Well, we'll go out there together, especially the definitely first year.
Yeah.
A lot of construction sites it's about knowing where not to be and kind of anticipating where they're at. Well, most of the equipment, the visibility of this equipment is really good for those operators. So being visible and kind of knowing where it's
Pretty much
at.
make sure you know they understand their
It's very
requirements.
similar to our labor standard certification form.
Moving around a project, moving slow and be very conspicuous to the operators and letting them inform them when you're on site. The other thing is make sure someone knows you're on site and that you leave. There's been things in the past where workers or inspectors.
What else do you have in here for federal verbiage?
The trucks are at the
That's
taking all white calls, hey, so-and-so's not home, where at? They go out there, the vehicle's still on.
We had the same consultants put this together that put together, no?
Those guys don't even feel it.
who's
You know,
your
so that's just where we're, this thing is just being conspicuous, knowing where not. to
Yeah,
be.
it wasn't, yeah, this is math.
It's very obvious.
Well, Malcolm Kearney knows what they're doing too.
Unfortunately, I got hit this project 6 weeks ago. I left. Malcolm Kearney, we had been
It's
put it out.
really easy to be on a clip.
Said, no, this is done by our own firm. And we have to hold it. Malcolm Kearney does a great job. I wanted to use it for that. That's who's gonna do our construction administration for us. They're very good.
Figure out that backup, who's doing everything and
Um,
the backup policy.
there's
Maybe
gonna
we do the backup person.
Right.
Well, it doesn't have that little, clause that says you can only.
And Wheeler is
Right.
used to this kind of thing.
They are?
Discrimination. I've done many of these projects.
I don't know where this, other than our legal department, some.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't
That's
put
the
this
first one I was
in
asking about, like before.
bid documents, but maybe they have a reef partner, not an attorney.
Well, this is just